Are you guys going to do that? All right. All right, good morning, everybody. Is everybody feeling ready to start? Right? We got a little music going so we'd get people excited about the presentation, right? After a long, foggy, wet, trafficy commute in, right? Whose commute has been particularly awful in the rain this week, right? So we appreciate our DJs, right, in the back who got us started with some music. Hi, I'm Jessica Goldsmith Barzilai, and I'm the Director of International and Career Services. And today we're here talking about understanding the international student experience, okay? And we're going to be using the perspective of two different departments. So we're going to be talking about the perspective from what the Center for International Studies needs to do, and also our counseling center. But I want to ask a question. Who here is from a department that supports international students? Yes, every hand should go up. You guys got the right answer, right? Because there shouldn't be a department on this campus that doesn't support international students. We have international students here, and that means every academic department serves international students. Our enrollment serves international students. There's different things that happen when you're enrolling an international student, right? Our housing, our food services, our student government, our trips, our career service office, our counseling centers, all of our different offices serve international students. And so we want to get better at that, right? We want to find out how we can be our best at serving international students. You hear a lot the term globalization now, right? Everybody wants to globalize campus. Kean goes global, right? But there's a lot more to that than simply opening your doors to people from other countries, right? It's about being welcoming and bringing their cultures in as a part of your culture at the university. And that can be a little bit trickier than just making sure that you know what regulations or what visa status an international student needs to have, or if they need any supports in another language. It goes a lot deeper than that when we talk about really having a culture here that welcomes students from abroad. And one of the things that we really want to hope and make sure as we understand our international students is that as we send more students abroad, we want to make sure that the campuses they're going to are doing the same thing, so that they're truly embracing the students. And to embrace the students, we need to understand what the students are going through and some of the different things about their culture. So that's some of what we're going to hit on today. We're going to hit on some of the regulation stuff, right? And we're going to have Katsumi Kashida, who's the managing assistant director in Center for International Studies, talk to us a lot about what students need in terms of regulations. And that sounds dry, but she really makes it not dry. She really makes it a lot of fun. And it's important so that we understand that, so we can keep everyone in status and people don't have to worry about their status when they're here. And then we have Mei Ling Cheng, who's going to be speaking to us from our counseling center. And you may not know, but she specifically specializes in working with students who are here from other countries when they're experiencing different difficulties and when they need assistance from the counseling center. And she's really an expert in understanding some of what happens when a student goes abroad and some of what they face. So that's what we're going to talk about. But I want to just talk about for a moment the iceberg. Do we have a picture of an iceberg up there? Yes. You guys may have heard this before, but when we talk about culture, sometimes we look at an iceberg. And the tip of the iceberg is what we see. And it's really a lot of times, we never get below the tip of an iceberg. So when you think about the iceberg and you think about what's coming up above the water, right? It's what you see about a person. It's the way they look. It's the way they dress. So I'm gonna ask my two presenters to stand up with me for a second, right? So You see Katsumi here, and you see Mei Ling here, right? And we all look different, right? So you might make some assumptions about what our culture is and who we are and where we come from simply by the way we look. You're also hearing me speak. So you might also be able to figure out some things about me based on my accent, right? I say I don't have an accent, but I have a New Jersey accent, right? And when you hear my other presenters speak, you might hear them speak differently from me, and you may make other assumptions, right? So you say, okay, maybe, well, I think maybe Jessica's from New Jersey, right? And I see the other two presenters, they look like they're Asian. Are they the same, coming from the same countries? I'm not sure. What assumptions can I make about them? Can I assume if they were born in this country or not born in this country just based on the way they look or the way they speak? There's a lot more to it when we look, right? So we look at people, and a lot of times that's what we're addressing. But when you go deeper and you begin to understand people's values and their customs, the way they were raised, that's really important when we're working with students. And you can even go deeper, and you can begin to understand their core values and their perceptions of things. So when we're working with students, it's important to know that if a student perhaps is being quiet, we want to see students take initiative. Is there something in their culture that's making it harder for them to stand up in class and say something? Or if we give feedback, we give feedback, right? Professors give feedback to students all the time. Is there something about that that based on something deeper, something that we haven't looked at, that the way criticism's handled in their country that might be hitting them in a different way, that they might react to it differently than what we're used to seeing? That's when we go below the tip of the iceberg. And that's what we want to make sure we do to, again, understand what our students are experiencing. I'm going to give you an example from this summer. We actually right now have a wonderfully exciting cohort of students. Cohort of students just means students that come in together, and we've got 11 students that are here from Egypt, which was exciting and kind of an all-campus effort to work to make sure that we put that together and we're prepared for those students. So immediately we talked about, well, is there anything special that has to happen in food services, right? Okay, we have students coming from Egypt, so maybe we need food, halal food, so it's food that they can eat. Oh, okay, see, we did a good job. We knew something about their culture, and we are going to make sure we get halal food. Then we had someone who maybe looked deeper and said, you know what? They're coming during Ramadan. That means that they're fasting for a portion of the day. Okay, so I think they can't eat when the sun's up, so we only have to have dinner for them, right? That's all we have to have. We just have to have dinner. We don't have to have anything else. No, we didn't, right? We didn't know everything. We didn't look a little bit deeper and find out. No, it means that we have to have food prepared at different times of the day. So it was at 3 o'clock in the morning that they were eating a meal, and then after sunset, right? If we had simply just said, kind of surface, oh, this is what they need, and didn't ask and look further, we might not have had food prepared for them. So now, right, big pat on the back. We did good, right? We made sure that we had food prepared for them at 3 o'clock in the morning and at 8 o'clock at night, and that the food was halal. We did good, right? We were really culturally sensitive, weren't we? We were very good, right? Did I make any mistakes there? For my 11 people coming on in? What mistake did I make? Right, because I didn't speak to the students, right? This was just what we decided, right? We didn't ask them. We assumed that because they were all coming from Egypt in a group, that they were all observing Ramadan, and that they were all going to eat at those specific times. I took what I could see at the tip of the iceberg and set out a plan without ever actually asking people what it was that they observed. Now, don't worry, because someone really wise on the team said, you're making an assumption, aren't you? Was that you, Katsumi? No. Probably from someone from Maxie's wonderful team who said, why don't you ask the students? Because you know what? There were students who weren't observing Ramadan, and then we wouldn't have had food for anyone except at 3 in the morning and 8 o'clock at night. So you want to make sure that in part, yeah, you're studying up on different cultures, but also that you're asking and not making assumptions so that we really can welcome people. So that's sort of the tip of the iceberg, and what I'm saying right now is just the tip of the iceberg of our presentation, because really what I want to do is I'm going to kick it over to these two experts who are going to talk about, from their perspective, not only what's needed for international students, right, what's needed for them, but what's important for them, but what's also important to them, right, because we don't want everything just based on what's important for me to keep in my status and make sure I have my visa, but what's also important to them, and Mei Ling can touch on that, to make sure that they have an experience that's a positive experience for them. So with that said, I'm going to kick it over to Katsumi Kishida, who runs Center for International Studies.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to introduce basic concepts of international students and what their legal status means. Just like Jessica said, talking about rules and regulations is really boring. It's a complex issue that is really hard to convey the nuts and bolts in less than an hour and a half. But I'm going to try my best. But please take notes. If you have any questions, please jot it down. At the end of our presentation, we'll have time for some Q&A, and I can certainly ask some questions that might pop up while I'm doing my presentation. So let's get started with this very exciting topic. Okay, so talking about our international students on campus, right? Some of our international students are degree-seeking students, so they're doing their undergraduate degree or graduate degree here with us at Kean, right? Other students may be our WKU students who are here for a semester or 2 semesters. That is part of our KUSA and WKU exchange program, right? Other international students may be from other partner institutions. So College of Business has several partner institutions abroad in Europe where some of our Kean students go for a summer program there. And we invite their students to KUSA to do a semester or even a year, 1 academic year, to do their studies here as part of their degree that they're receiving overseas, right? And just like Jessica mentioned, we also have our summer short-term students. So we have our 11 Egyptian students right now, and we also have a cohort from WKU students who are doing global practica with the business school. There's about 30 of them. We've always done English immersion programs as well during the summer. So those students are also considered international students with us. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of what a student status means, I'm going to start off with an overview. Okay? It's always helpful to kind of see the big picture and then narrow it down to the details, right? So when we think about residents in the United States, they're first grouped into 2 categories: US citizens, and everybody else is considered aliens, okay? And then under the alien categories, they're further separated into 4 different categories, okay? Lawful permanent residents, also known as immigrants, green card holders. There's the non-immigrant categories. I'm going to come back to that because that's where our students fall. There's asylees and refugees. So asylees are residents that are already here that are filing for lawful permanent resident status because they may not be able to return to their country due to their religious beliefs, sexual orientations, or for political reasons. Refugees are people that are currently outside the United States that are seeking asylum into the United States, right? And then there is the other category, right? So residents that don't fit in the first 3, they fall under the other. So for us as a university, our DACA students, deferred action for childhood arrival students, okay, also known as Dreamers, fall in the other category. Okay. So let's go back to the non-immigrant status. Okay. So people that hold a non-immigrant status is looking to come into the United States on a temporary basis, right? Which is the #1 determining factor that separates the lawful permanent residents or asylees and refugees and others from the non-immigrant category, because they're saying, I want to go to the United States temporarily. My plan is to return to my home country when I'm finished what I'm doing that I came into the United States for, right? So there are over 20 types of non-immigrant categories, and there are subcategories underneath that too. And they're categorized by the government with a letter and a number, right? So you hear me say F/1, F1 students. F is a student category. 1 means they're the principal person holding that status. If our student has dependents, let's say a child with them, and they're coming together when our students are studying here, they're giving an F/2 status, right? Which means they're not the primary status holder, but they're secondary, they're dependents of the 1, right? There's other categories under the non-immigrant, for example, H-1Bs. Okay, that's another category where a person may be in the United States to work, right? Visitors category is considered B1. Okay. So, our students fall in a non-immigrant status, and that's critical in understanding their legal status. It's a temporary status. Okay, that means they have plans to go home, right? And they're not looking to immigrate. And I'll kind of explain how that plays into and why that is so important for us to understand. This is the beginning point. So, who are they? Our students hold a non-immigrant status in order to study in the United States. Okay, so Kean University is approved by Department of Homeland Security to be sponsors and bring in international students in the F1 status or the J1 status to study with us on campus. Now, not all of our students that may consider themselves international, right, fall under our sponsorship. There might be a child of a parent who has an H1 status, which is the work permit status, and they're dependent, so they may hold an H4 status, right? So it's easy to say, oh, you're an international student, you must be on an F1 or J1 status sponsored by your university, but not also. DACA students may also consider themselves as international because they may have been born in another country, right? But when our office talks about international students, we're really talking about our F1 and J1 students. Does that mean we don't care about anyone else? Absolutely not. We do. We're here for all international students on campus. We're here to support them. But why is F1 and J1 so important to us? The reason is because we're the sponsors, right? We have a responsibility as an institution to the US government to say these are our F1 and J1 students, and we're maintaining their status. We're making sure they're in status. And we have responsibility to report this information. And I'll go into a little bit more about what that means. So, F1 status is the most common student status that you will find in the United States. Okay? The most important document to an international student in the F1 status is called Certificate of Eligibility, commonly referred to as Form I-20. And the F1 status is, again, going back to the non-immigrant status, it's a temporary status given to students whose primary purpose is to pursue a full course of study. Okay? So that's their priority. They're saying, hi, US government, I want to come to the United States because I want to get a degree at Kean University. So what that means is they are eligible for some employment in the United States, but very limited and very restricted, right? So a US government officer will say things like, well, if you wanted to work in the United States, you should apply for a work status, not a student status whose primary purpose is to study. Now, so what separates the F1 and J1? We have both of these statuses on campus. Oh, sure, I can get into that. So international students in F1 status can work on campus up to 20 hours a week because it's restricted and limited. And they're eligible to work off campus. And the off-campus employment authorization is referred to as CPT, which stands for Curricular Practical Training, and OPT stands for Optional Practical Training. And just to give a brief, because I can do a whole PDD on those two things alone, what that means is employment for international students that happen off campus has to be practical training, which means it has to be either curricular, part of their degree. So if you have a degree that requires an internship as part of a degree requirement, they will be authorized to do a CPT, right? OPT is optional. So if a student decides, it's not part of my degree, but I still want some industry experience, then they will apply to be approved for optional practicals. It's optional because not everybody has to do it, which is OPT. So those are the different things of the employment side for F1 students. Yes. Yes, you can. International students in F1 status can work on campus up to 20 hours a week during the semester. And during official university breaks, they can work up to 40 hours. So yes, they can work on campus. Now, going back to the difference between the F1 and J1, thank you for your question. Because, you know, I always think everybody knows what CPT and OPT is, but clearly, of course, because I'm in that world all the time. So the J1 status is different from an F1 status because these students are part of an official exchange program. Okay? So they're being invited to Kean University as part of an exchange agreement. Or these students might be receiving a Fulbright scholarship and being invited by the US government to study at a US institution, which might be Kean University. Right? So some of our students, especially the ones that come from our partner schools, are on the J1 status. And their forms are called DS 2019. And they also get to do some employment, but similar to the F1 in that it's limited, right? And they have to be approved first. So these two statuses are different, but similar in the basis of understanding, which is they're here to study, right? So before I get into the nitty-gritties of, are you bored yet? Yeah. So our WKU students are in an F1 status, okay? Because they're our students, right? So because WKU is registered as our campus, although it exists in China, it doesn't become an external partnership. It becomes your own students. So they're here on an F1 status. But that's a great question because I think if you heard my presentation, you would think, oh, the WKU students are on a J1. But because WKU is Kean University and they're receiving a Kean University degree, they will fall under the F. Visa versus status. Okay, so you hear these two words often. F1 visa, F1 status, J1 visa, a visitor's visa, something visa, other visas, right? The reason why it's important for us to understand a little bit, not too much in detail, a little bit about the difference between the two is because these two words are used interchangeably all the time, and they mean very different things. So I'm going to explain it with a journey. So an international student, let's say the student is in Brazil and is interested in studying at Kean University. They apply through our wonderful admissions office. Yay. And they're admitted. They meet all the requirements for their degree, for their application. They're admitted, and then they come to our office. Usually Anna, who works in my office as an advisor, works with the student to get all the necessary documents in order for us to issue the certificate of eligibility I-20. That's something our office issues because we're sponsoring their status. We issue the I-20. I-20 has a lot of information on it, from their biographical data, their name, date of birth. What are they studying? Are they undergrads, grads? What are they majoring in? How are they sponsoring their studies? Who's paying for the tuition? All that is inputted and written out in the form I-20. It gets spitted out from this database that we use. So the student then received the I-20 back home in Brazil, but just having this certificate of eligibility doesn't allow them to show up at a US border, at a port of entry, to say, hey, I'm here now because I'm going to Kean University. That piece of document, as important as it is, that document alone doesn't allow the student to do that. So what does the student do next? They take that certificate of eligibility and they go to their nearest US embassy. And they do what we call a visa application. Essentially, the visa application is the US government vetting the student to say, do they have any they do a background check? Do they have any criminal records on file? What is their family history, right? Are they really going to study at Kean, right? Is that their intent, right? They have an interview, they meet with an immigration officer, and officers will be asking, like, what's your academic plan? Right, so this is the vetting process. If the immigration officer at the US Embassy decides, okay, this student is good to go. I've checked, they're cleared. And once they're cleared, they get an F1 visa stamp in their passport, right? So does that mean, oh good, all right, I'm going to Kean University? Not yet, not so easy. So then, with their passport and the visa inside the passport and the certificate of eligibility and other documents, we always tell the students, be prepared. Now, with those documents in hand, they're now allowed to show up at a border, right? To say, hey, I'm here, I would like to study at Kean University. Working? Can you hear me? Oh, all of a sudden I couldn't hear myself. Okay, it's not a good sign. So, they get off the plane, they see an immigration officer at the border, right? With their passport, visa, certificate of eligibility, other things like admission letters, right? Now another vetting process, right? Why are you here? Which school are you going to? What are you studying? Do you have any friends in the United States already? These are some common questions that an immigration officer may ask, right? And then they're approved to be admitted. So then the immigration officer says, you're good to go. You're now lawfully admitted into the United States, and that's when they gain their F1 status, right? So status is really what's important for the student. The visa is like an entry ticket to an amusement park, right? I have this ticket to enter this amusement park, right? Once you get in, you're allowed to stay inside the amusement park and have all the fun and do the rides, right? It's essentially that, right? So as long as our students are in status, right, if their visa expires, is that a big deal? It could be a big deal, right? If they remain in the United States, it's not a big deal because it's just the entry permit, right? They need to maintain their status. Now, if a student says, oh, hey, I'm going home for the summer, some things you might want to ask is, hey, is your visa valid in your passport? Because if it's not, then they need to go back to the US Embassy to renew that entry permit, right? Along with obviously making sure they're in status. So those are the differences between a visa and status, but you'll often hear even our students say, I have an F1 visa, which is different from saying, I have an F1 status. Okay, so maintaining status is really important. So what must our students do to maintain their status? They have to pursue a full course of study, going back to the fact that this status is primarily to engage in studies in the United States. Their passport must be valid, right? Yes, and I will get to that in my next slide. Yes. They have to maintain and update information, contact information with our office. Where are they living this semester? What's their phone number? What's their email address? Because we as an institution are required to have this information at all times. So a Department of Homeland Security officer comes knocking in our office and say, hey, we need to find this student. We need to be able to pull up their file and say, they're residing here, this is their phone number, this is their email address. So Anna, every semester, reaches out to all of our international students to make sure we have that information. Their document, certificate of eligibility, has to be valid until they complete their program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too. And if things change, like their academic plans, that has to also be updated on their certificate of eligibility I-20 or DS 2019, because that's what verifies their status in the United States. So, I'm almost done. Almost done with the regulatory stuff. So what's a full course of study? Okay. For undergraduate students, it's 12 credits per academic semester. For grad students, it's 9 credits. And because they're international students, they're only allowed 1 online course towards their 9 or 12 credit requirement. Okay. So one of the biggest conversations we are having in our international education and student services field is this 1 online credit regulation, right? Because across the United States, a lot of our classes are transitioning into either hybrid classes or fully online. So as an international student, you're really restricted and limited. So we're fighting as a group of professionals in the field to say, government, you have to rethink that rule. But as it stands right now, it's still only 1 online credit. Also, it's really important to know that the student's academic status impacts their immigration status, right? Going back to the conversation of what their purpose is in the United States, right? So if an international student gets academically dismissed because they're not meeting our Kean standards, they lose their immigration status because they're here in the United States to say, I'm doing a degree at Kean University, and if they're no longer eligible to continue their studies, they lose the sponsorship from us, right? So we work with Jean very closely. I'm asking her at the beginning of the semester, who's on probation this semester? Right, because it's important for me to have a conversation with an international student to say, hey, you're on probation 1 this semester. How does that affect your immigration status? They need to also understand that these 2 things go hand in hand. So let's say if a student works off campus, didn't come to our office to get prior approval, and is found they're engaging in unlawful employment, right? That's a cause for termination of their status, right? Because they violated their status. And as harsh as that sounds, right? Because we all want our students to be successful, and we understand their hardship, right? But we as an institution have the responsibility to say to the Department of Homeland Security, this student violated their status. If they violate their immigration status, then they're no longer eligible to remain in the United States in legal status, which means as Kean University, because we're sponsoring their status, we can no longer sponsor them, which means they can no longer continue studying at Kean, right? So these two things go hand in hand. And as much as I do orientation with our students when they come and try to explain how they're so connected, you know, it's hard, right? Things happen. So it's important for us as a community who support international students to know that these two things go hand in hand. Also, they have to be making normal progress towards their degree. And this is something that we laugh about in our field, because the regulation actually says normal progress, like we know what that means, right? A normal progress at Kean University might be different from a normal progress at a different university, right? But that's how the way the regulation's written. The way we as an institution interpret is we think of, if this international student was a domestic student, a US citizen student, or any other in the other category, right? Would they get the same chances? They must get the same chances, right? So we follow the academic retention rules, right? You get academic prohibition 1, you get academic prohibition 2, and then you're finally dismissed, right? So international students also follow that same institutional rule, because we would say that our American students are still making normal progress, they're giving the same chances, right? Yes. I love it. Questions? Correct. Yes. So, yes, absolutely. Great question. So our summer students that are here now, if they're doing summer 1, summer 2, their requirement is 6 credits. These 12 and 9 is for the semester requirements, right? So then we go back to the same thing, same question of, okay, so what would a full-time course of study mean for international students? Then we look to say, what's our institutional policy that makes the summer student full-time, right? And that's 6 credits, right? So we apply the same policy to an international student as well. Okay, so yes. Yes, great question. It's a great, great question, because that is something that Anna deals with every semester. And I'm going to get to that when I do my frequently asked questions. All right? Yes. Does student conduct report impacts status? Yes, right? Because if our international student has a conduct issue and are dismissed and no longer able to study at Kean, then they no longer have the immigration status. So yes, they are impacted, right? So academic status includes like conduct, right? Because that impacts their ability to continue with their degree. Okay, so time check. Okay. Am I taking too long, Mailing? Okay, I gotta wrap up. Okay. So I can go on hours, but so how do we do all of this work, right? So we work with an interface called Seevis, right? Some of you may know Seevis, have heard of Seevis. It's a database run by the Department of Homeland Security. It stands for Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. And this is where the monitoring and the reporting happens. So myself and Anna are constantly on Seevis every day, logging in to make sure our students are maintaining status and that we are reporting what needs to be reported, right? So what's reported? Everything, right? Everything's reported. If they change their address, that gets reported. If they change their degree level, so they were originally an undergrad student, is now going for their master's, that gets reported, right? They might transfer to a different school. They might decide, I liked Kean for 2 years, but now I want to go somewhere else. That gets reported, right? Leave of absence, change in financial support, or dismissals or withdrawals, right? Everything gets reported on the student side. Now, as well as the student side, over here I wrote institutional legal compliance. We are also required by Department of Homeland Security as an institution to follow rules and regulations, right? So, Kean's record that we report through Seevis also has to be updated all the time. So, we're adding a new campus, our Skyland campus, that has to be added to say, we have a new campus. Our international students might be taking classes over there. They need to know that information, right? We have a new accreditation that was approved. They need to know that. Change in admission requirements. They need to know that because they need to know, how are we inviting international students on campus, right? It's like a framework or guideline that we report to Department of Homeland Security and they approve us. Adding a new degree program as well, right? So we have a master's in architecture starting September. So I'm reporting through Seevis to say, hey, we have a new program. We want to admit international students, and they give us approval for that. So Seevis is what we use to do interactions, right, with Department of Homeland Security. We also have visits from officers on an annual basis to make sure that we as an institution are doing the right things to maintain our student status and our legal compliance. We have a visit upcoming in August, right? We meet with our representatives. But day-to-day basis Seevis. So the I-20 and the DS 2019 is issued by our office for the students using the Seevis system. Okay, so I gotta wrap up because Mei-Ling has amazing things to say as well. And we have a case study for you guys to work on. Yay, group activity? Everybody's like, no, please. Okay, I'm gonna make Jessica do that. I'm gonna make my boss do that so you don't hate me. Okay, so these are some of the frequently asked questions. Just because I'm short on time, I'm gonna maybe not do all of them, but there was a question about dropping the course, right? So it is critical, right? Because they have this 12 credit requirement for, let's say, an undergrad student, can they just drop it? Absolutely they cannot, right? Because as soon as they fall below the 12, they're out of status, right? And I have to report that to say this student did not maintain status. So me and Anna have been doing is we've been working with the registrar's office, right? So during the ad drop period, we ask for reports. And so I send the list of our international students, and we look at each one of them and make sure they're at 12. But sometimes things happen where the student drops on the last day of ad drop, and they go below 12, and then there's no way for them to add that last 3 credits back. I have to tell the student, I'm sorry. It sounds really harsh, but it is the regulations, and we have to follow that, right? So to answer your question, we want to partner with everyone on campus so that if you do come across an international student, and we're working with enrollment services for us to be able to identify right on colleague who the international students are. So as soon as you pull up their student profile, it's going to have a marker that says this is an international student. Then then that would help us say, oh, you want to drop 3 credits? Oh, you're an international student. You can't. I'm sorry. Right? So we're working with other units on campus to make sure that we can identify them much easier so that they don't fall out of status. Because it is important for us to help them be successful. Right? So we're working to try to make those system updates. Right? Like we're going to bring in advise. So we're putting an international component on that as well. Okay, some other questions. Why is English proficiency requirement so important for international students? That's another question I get quite often, right? So the reason is because when we as an institution is sponsoring their status, we are verifying with the Department of Homeland Security to say this student meets our English requirements and they are going to be successful when they enter and pursue the study at Kean University. So we're actually telling the government, yes, this student has English proficiency, and that's why they're being invited to study with us, right? And the way we do that is asking the students to take either the TOEFL test or the IETLS, or show us that they've taken credits, college level credits of English, so that we as an institution have a policy to say, this is our policy. We hold all of our international students to this one standard to measure our English proficiency. So our office has been working with admissions office quite a bit to kind of get to that English proficiency requirement. So there's no questions or like, what if, buts, right? It's a straightforward policy. So what if an international student needs to take a leave of absence because they're having health-related issues, right? There are ways to help an international student, especially if the reason why they can't continue a full course of study or continue during the semester because they have health-related, that's outside the student's control, right? The government does give means for them to drop below full-time or just take a leave of absence altogether. But that process has a lot of paperwork involved as well, because I need to report the reasons why I'm giving this international student a leave of absence, right? So my time is up. I've probably gone over. So I'm going to hand it to Mei Ling, who is going to take it from here and talk about her experiences as a counselor interacting with international students.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me well? Okay. So I was talking to my associate director this morning, that Dr. Annan. This morning, I was thinking that what can I possibly tell you that you don't already know about international students? Because you see them, you teach them, you help them, you live with them in a sense. So I think one thing I could offer is kind of summarize what Kazumi was saying just now, that I was an international student from Taiwan. I was an F1 holder. And I did my CPT, I did my OPT, I did my H1, I renewed my H1, that's my working visa, and I did my green card, and I get my citizenship. So I did all of them. So I have experience. I also worked with an international student at Seton Hall before I came here. So I do have experience. I feel that that's something I could offer to you, because I was telling Vidal this morning, like, why can't you just sit at home and Google an updated article and you will know about international student? You don't need me here, but I have the experience, okay? So I would like to share with you today. So that my first slide is talk about so let's look at kind of a national data, what college students are going through, then we will move on to international student. So according to for 2018 National College Health Assessment Report, they ask, within the last 12 months, what do you find most challenge or difficult for you to handle? Academics, number 1. Number 2 is finances, sleeping difficulty, intimate relationship, personal appearance, and family problem. And the report also indicated, is not on the slide, is that the top 4 factor affect students' academic performance. Number one is stress. Number two is anxiety. Number three is sleep difficulty. Number four is depression. So the next slide. Our office counseling center, about 3 years ago, we recognized we really, international students just have a tendency not to see therapists. So what we do is we offer support consultation daily, 3 to 4. So international students are welcome to use that hour. It's a drop-in. You don't have to sign paperwork. You don't have to even give us a name. So nothing is on the record. But majority of the time was used by our WKU student because, you know, they are our biggest group here. So I put a little data together, the unofficial data, what they are going through in the last academic year, 2018 to 19. So you could see there's not much difference, but the next slide I want to talk about before you move on is they are similar, but there are differences as well. So what I want to highlight is No, can you go back? Yes. So for our international student here, like for the living environment, it's interesting. In the fall last year, many students visit health services because they couldn't sleep. And Robin and I have the conversation, we don't know why. They just couldn't sleep. And for spring 2019, if you look at the academic environment, it's interesting. In the fall, students report more hostility than in the spring. And that we're talking about just last year for the academic environment. And last year for the fall, this spring 2019, many students actually transferred, which is very unique, which normally doesn't happen to our WKU student, but last year that's something unique. And a lot of students come talk about graduate school because 70% of them actually move on to graduate school. And a lot of them, especially, do we have an accounting professor here from accounting department? Okay, good. Many of them actually sit at my chair and say, I don't want to study accounting. That every semester. Because their parents say, accounting is the best major. You can find a job. Do it. Yeah. And I would sit at my table and say, no, that's not a good idea. Yes. So can we move on? So before, I identified 6 unique mental health stressors faced by international students to share with you guys. But before I talk in detail a little bit, I just wanted to say, I see people from housing, there's some faculty here, you know, it's very important that you are the front line. You see them every day, you see the difference. If Johnny come into my office or go to Kazumi's office and his hair is not combed, he doesn't smell good, we don't know if Johnny just not care about hygiene or something had changed. Johnny lost a lot of weight, we wouldn't know that, but you would know that. You see them day in and day out, so you could report. You could report the difference, and you could report it earlier. So you are important, and you are unique in that sense to help them. So let's go with the first. The first area I want to talk about is the language barrier. When you see us, when I start opening my mouth, you know I'm an international person. I have an accent. So do you ever wonder, when you teach a student, do you ever question yourself, you ask these questions, if students struggle with English, everything else suffer? Do you ask yourself that question? So for academic, there are many students say when they go to first class, if the professor has a lot of reading and require participation, they will drop the class or they will hesitate to take that class because if they're not confident in their English proficiency, they will do that. And some students say participation is not something familiar to them because in a lot of countries, you're just there. You don't really participate, right? So some students say, I finally woke up the courage. I want to ask a question. I want to answer a question. But by the time they write down the sentence, come up with the sentence, correct it, grammatically correct, the professor already moved on, or somebody already took the response. So it's a challenge to them. So maybe a little time, a little patience, a little cold calling might be okay, or eye contact, encourage them. And, you know, let down. So some students, they perform very well in their native language, but when they first got here, especially in the beginning, they have so much more they have to adjust. So it's difficult to do well. So there's a little let down is that how come I can't do well here? and also linguistic confusion. So this is the part that international students always tell me. For example, the professor will say, I'm gonna use Kim because I work with her. Kim, that's a interesting, that's interesting. Is that really interesting? Sometimes when we say, that's interesting, it's really not that interesting, right? Or we say, Kim, that's a good report, but you might want to think about do A, B, C. But what you are really telling student is, Kim, you must make some changes. But people are not, I feel like my personal experience, I feel American are very positive and polite in their expression, in a sense. That's my experience. Okay, so this could be my bias, it could be truth. But I feel like we use this a lot. That's interesting. And sometimes even myself, I'm like, is that really interesting? I want to think about that, right? So for non-academic, this is my example. I consider myself pretty good in school, but the way we learn English is very different. That let's say you use food, or for example, I learn carrot, I learn celery, I learn tomato, I learn potato, but nobody teach me broccoli. So I didn't know until I came here. I was like, so I keep on saying green cauliflower, and people will know what that is. Right, and then people never corrected me. So I learned when I first time ordered Chinese food thing, people say, oh, beef broccoli, never had that in my life. I realized, oh, that is broccoli. And I learned that because, you know, I learned it here. You know, so you think, if you could write an academic report, why don't you know this? But we don't know because we don't learn that. And cheese, talk about cheese. There's so many cheeses here. It's confusing. In Taiwan, you only have the square, the orange one, the American cheese, that's not real cheese, but that's all I know. So when you come here, imagine an international student go make a sandwich and they say, what kind of cheese do you want? And you're like, oh, holy cow, I don't know. I only know that orange square cheese. So the reason I mention this is that a lot of times, things that we take it for granted, that very minor, and you don't really, that for international students, they have to kind of process that. So it's kind of a chore. So let's say, that also, because of language barrier for the non-academic, definitely limit their capacity to connect with students. The student always say, we want to connect with American student, but I don't know if they have patience to listen to what I have to say. Because I talk slow, I understand a bit slower, I need to process that. Okay, and linguistic confusion, like I'm gonna use a Kean for example, because this is a real example. I remember when the first time I hear, you hit that nail on the head, right? The first time I heard it many, many years ago when I first got here, I was like, okay, is that good or not good? And it's always, every time she said that, I giggle inside, because I know every word, but I don't know what that means. So if you say to me, if Jean say to me, Mei-Ling, I wasn't born yesterday, I was like, I know that, but I don't know what that means. But when you say that to international students, they don't understand what you mean, even they know the word. So it requires a little learning, right? So let's move on. Yes, yes. Right. Okay. Okay. Yes. I will be busy next semester. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Like a mentor program, right? Not here. But for our KU students who go to China, they do have a mentor. That's a good idea. Yeah. Right. Right. I agree. I agree. Yeah. Right. 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 Might not get it. Right. 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 Or even just a simple, we how many times a day we say how are you, what's up, and you keep on going. So that's something that in a lot of Asian culture, when someone asks you how are you, you are responding. So you are finally work up the courage to answer I am good, how are you, and then the person is gone. So in the beginning it's like oh, okay, they're not interested in more. Then it take a while to make you realize it's a greeting, it's not a question. And if somebody say to you, let's have lunch sometime, it's just being polite. But international students might take out their calendar and then say, when? So that's something that, but I also think that's a process that international students have to learn as well. Right. 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 Or hurt their feelings. Thank you. Right. Yes, I have it in the back. Yes. Yes, I do. Yeah. So let me move on to the next one. Okay. Next one, acculturative stress. Acculturative stress is kind of a psychological impact of how people adjust to a new culture. So I put a few things. This kind of sounds make no sense at all. So a lot of international students, like our WKU students, they come here. It's very hot out there, but they are cold already. And in September, they are already cold. They wear long sleeve. Even in the summer, they wear long sleeve because they don't want to get tan. And they have an umbrella. I'm sure you see that. And then people are like, why are you doing that? And why they drink hot water all the time? And for coin, like something very simple. American coin are the only coin in the world, I believe, have no number on it. And the value doesn't really correspond to the size, doesn't really correspond to the value. It's confusing, right? And then you think about, if you say, okay, I'm gonna learn something from the TV today. I wanna watch news. The news told you today is 75 degrees, and you're like, is that hot or cold? I don't know, because most of the country in the world uses Celsius system. So 75 degrees is 23. So if you tell them it's 23 C, they will be like, okay, I know what that means. 75 F doesn't mean anything to me. If Kelly, my other coworker, asked me, Mei-Ling, how tall are you? You're tall for Asian. I said, I'm 167 centimeter. She was like, I have no idea what that is. But if I tell her I'm 5'6", then she know how tall I am, right? So that is something that international students will have to adjust in the very beginning when they are not used to it. And cuisine, like talk about food. Food is very important. How much more can you take it? The campus food, American food. When you first semester, you might be excited for the first month, and you start missing your food. And then when you first time order your like for me, first time I order Chinese food, it's a culture shock. Like, this is Chinese food. I don't know what's the dark sauce. Never use that. Why we have fortune cookie? That's an American thing. Why do you need to put soy sauce on the white rice? That's just not appropriate. So, a lot of things very confusing. You kind of have to learn. And then talk about social interaction. If I talk to Jean this way, Jean might be terrified. But because I'm invading her, her personal space, but in some culture, you talk pretty close, and it's okay. So it's something that I know this is something probably not what you expect to hear from, but I feel like that's something that most people don't talk about. Is everything is a chore in a sense in the beginning because they have to learn the new things, and something extra have to be done. So the next thing I want to talk about is the classroom etiquette. Yes. Do I have that? Is not okay. So actually. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Put, I think a walk station in the dining, I think it's in the Myron Student Center cafeteria. So that's something they're working on during the summer.
Right. Right. Like I think they're gonna call like what Asian cuisine or something, or Asian station, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Somehow I missed my slide. So anyway, the classroom etiquette. I think a lot of professors struggle. Students really don't understand what's group work, what is individual work, and they always ask this question: Can I work with a friend? Can I work with a group of people? And what is considered recycling paper? How do I do the quote? How do I note where that came from? How do I cite? A lot of international students really don't understand that, right? And also that one thing that is interesting that the professor sometimes walk in and then Professor Anna say, just call me Anna. And the student, no, that's not appropriate, right? And I don't want to do that. But you say, no, call me Anna. I said, but that's not appropriate. I don't want to do that. So you kind of like, they call me, like WKU students call me teacher. It's funny, they always call me teacher. I don't teach them. So it's very weird to me. So I said, call me Mei Ling. I said, okay, Mei Ling teacher. I said, okay, we're not going nowhere. We're not going nowhere, okay. Yeah, so, that's something, even just, one thing I really want to talk about is say my name, like a class etiquette. Another professor, how many of us ask a student, do you have an English name? How many of us ask that? We do, right, I do that too. Sometimes because you can't pronounce it. And I remember my first student from South Africa at Seton Hall. His name is Luba Balloon Balulu. Luba Balloon Balulu. I love him, but he said, everybody call me Luba. I said, why people call you Luba? Oh, because the people cannot pronounce it. But to this day, 15 years later, I still remember Luba Balloon Balulu because it sounds really funny, and that's his name. And there's actually a movement I think started in Columbia University that it called Say My Name. It's kind of started with the Asian student. Say my name, because my name has a meaning to it. So say my name. So do your best effort to ask student, what's your name? And if you really cannot pronounce it, then you have to figure out what to do with it. Yes. So next one. Okay, unrealistic expectation. A lot of students, they're very successful in their home country, but in the beginning, they might suffer a little bit because a lot of adjustment they have to do. So, there's some unrealistic expectation thinking that I do well in school, at home, I might do well here. But if not, there's a letdown there. Family, a lot of family put their money, their emotional investment in this. So a lot of students feel like if they don't do well, it's a lot of pressure and it became a burden. There's no difference for American students as well. But for some students, if education is highly emphasized in certain culture, they are more willing to invest in you. And when you are not successful, it's very difficult to handle. And sometimes it's just a perceived pressure that you feel you have to succeed. But if your parent really have a high expectation for your education and you cannot meet this expectation, then you feel very stressed and you feel you're kind of very alone in this country because you cannot tell them why you're not doing well because they don't understand. And this is a thing that What is wrong with you? You're not only supposed to be happy to be here, but you're also privileged to be here. So, sometimes students feel that they can't tell their parent they are suffering because you suppose you are in America, you have everything, you study abroad. What can be wrong? It's a privilege. Not everybody can do that, which is true. Not everybody could study abroad, and I get that. But really, when you have difficulty, even you talk to people, you find the courage to tell your home country, your people from your home country. They might say, "Are you exaggerating? Are you overreacting?" And it cannot be that bad. And the last things that a lot of people feel like, a lot of WKU students say, sometimes when they go shopping, people look and come back from the resident hall, people look at them like, oh, here we go again. They went shopping because they have money. Does not always apply to all WKU students or our international students. A lot of international students only have money for the first year because they only need to submit for 1 year's funding. And if they are here for 4 years, 2 years, a lot of them really worry about where the money comes from next year. So just be mindful of that. Not everybody get to study abroad and they have money. Okay, so crisis originated at home. Let's say let's argue Kazumi. Let's say Kazumi live in Union. Kazumi's son is sick. Kazumi could go home, right? Kazumi's son, maybe let's say Kazumi has a son in college, which she doesn't, but I'm just saying that her son said, "Mommy, I'm feeling really down. I need to go home." Okay, you can come home. But international student, when someone at home became sick, they can't go home, right? They can't go home. And they may not have money to go home. And their parent may be going through divorce, domestic violence at home. I have a WKU student was very, very worried about his mother's safety because he came to America. He's the only man, only child in the house. So he's worried about his mother's safety with the dad. And there's nothing he can do about it. And then, a war break out. Like I remember when I was at Seton Hall, there was a student lost contact with his family for like 2 months because Ivory Coast has a civil war went on at that time. And, with our student, from Venezuela, there are times that they couldn't get in contact with their family and things like that, what's going on right now. Okay, so someone else, that significant other, you have a girlfriend or boyfriend, in your home country, and they want to break up with you because you're here for too long. And economic hardship, that is, what? Oh, okay. I'm running out of time, I was told. All right. So just kind of, these are the things that, student experience, that international student really kind of under a lot of pressure because of all this difficulty. So let's go to the next one. Okay, illness, this one, okay. So, when you get sick, if you don't know the language, it's very difficult to tell people how you were sick, right? So language barrier, insurance, copay, specialist, hospitalization, all this is very difficult because international students insurance actually doesn't cover anything, in my opinion. Because I have bought a few before, it really doesn't cover anything. But they do, if God forbid you die, they take your body home. That I remember that. Right. So, our health services, they are pretty good at, help students. So, if you ever hear a student here talk about the nurse, Caroline, she was like, "Do you sleep well? Did you eat?" Like, there's a lot of body language going into it. And there's a lot of translation. Sometimes I go help, but if it's not Chinese student, I can't help. Yeah. And for mental health, this is something I really want to talk about. That there are 5 reasons student really doesn't want to come to see mental health professional. Number 1, stigma. It's hard to accept psychological issues that you have problems. Okay, unawareness. Mental health in many countries are a small field that people don't really know what we do. So they don't know what's a therapy and what's a therapist. And also, you could give students 100 orientation. They will still ask you, where is counseling center? They will still ask you, right? So they don't know where they are. Language barrier, worry about confidentiality. This, even American students are very concerned. Is what I say here gonna go on my educational record? You could tell them 100 times. they still won't believe you. But for international students, there's a little layer, extra layer to it. They're worried about what they say here will impact on their visa. And I'm not sure if you guys are aware, for the fall 2019, this group of international students, they are being asked to submit their social media account when they apply for visa. Yes, it's a requirement. Yep. So, yep. Yep. So, yes, it's already in place. So, if whatever I say in my home country is not safe, how could I believe what I say here is safe? Okay. So, some students believe supernatural causes are responsible for mental health. So when they come, they don't want to appear they are crazy because they don't know if you will understand. There's a student say to me, her mother passed away, and she said, I talk to my mother every day, and I ask guidance from my mother, and it worked for her. But she would say, do you think I'm crazy? No, you're not crazy. That's just how, culturally is appropriate. Yes. So next one. Okay. This one, added concerns. So right now, with our political environment, okay, the immigration status, there's a lot of changes in the rule when it comes to visa. What can you do after you graduate? Even the H-1 visa, working visa, there's a lot of changes. So when you are here 4 years, 2 years, or even 5 years after your PhD, you're not sure how to plan your future. It's highly uncertain for particularly international students in this regard, is that how could I stay here, or even just work for a year? If I use my OPT only for 1 year, which I'm only allowed for a year because I'm a psych major, if Jean wants to hire me, Jean might think, okay, I could only have meeting for 1 year. After I train her, she have to go home. And Kean doesn't sponsor H-1 visa. Do I really want to hire her? Probably not. So that's a concern. And also, you can go home again. A lot of students, especially students from China, doesn't have to be WKU student. It's funny that every time they come to say goodbye at the end of the semester, the one thing that really concerns is that they will no longer have Google. Yeah, because there's a censorship. They won't have Facebook. So if you rely on that every day, it's like, oh, can I go home again? Yeah. Next one. Okay, so before we get into the case study, just kind of look at the question is that think about what we just talked about. So when you don't have the vocabulary to express yourself verbally, what is going on with you? How do you manage everyday life? Interaction is a chore, okay? When you cannot head home for the weekend, when you're sick or when you are hungry, or when you cannot just feel bad because you feel bad about feeling bad. It's a double barrier because it's a privilege for you to be here. So how could you feel bad? Then you feel bad about feeling bad, right? So when you feel that you have to tough it out and you can't ask for help because it's not culturally appropriate and you don't trust the system. So imagine all this, and we're gonna go into a case study that. Oh, okay. All right, then we will skip. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Okay. So best practice on campus. So what we come up with is that we want integration and prevention. So the default expectation is that we want to create a great sense of belonging. So be supportive and make yourself available and resourceful to them. Encourage them to use your office hour, encourage your college hour, get involved in the student activity. Every November, Sue come out with a great idea doing the Thanksgiving luncheon. Take them for Thanksgiving luncheon for great cause and also for educational, culturally appropriate. Hire them on campus, get them a part-time job so they can learn and they can practice. Give them orientation. And if you see something, say something. You report on the mental health issue. And if you're not sure, talk to your colleague or call our office. And Jessica mentioned one thing really, really, when we are rehearsing, kind of discussing what we want to talk about. She said, if you see something weird, it's probably weird. But a lot of times we don't want to offend people, so we don't report. And we use it could be cultural, it could be cultural. When you use a culture to explain everything, you explain nothing. If it's weird, probably something going on, it's okay to have a conversation with somebody before you head it to the student, if you don't want to offend the student. Okay, so also, we really wanted you to help increase students' mental health literacy, educated them. What is mental health? You know, you're not crazy. It's free. Okay, even you're in a honeymoon time in the beginning, you feel that everything is nice and dandy. But when you hit some, barrier, you could come to our office. Kind of just really educating what mental health is about. So we would really want your help on that. And a lot of professors have been doing really good job. They make a call, walk student over. And also, it's also important that in the beginning, we always give students a lot of information and we're done with it. So I think we need to kind of plug ourselves in later on in the semester and say, hey, remember me? Do you remember this? Do you remember that? Do you need this? Do you need that? And we were thinking that maybe orientation, a lot of schools are now doing orientation overseas. Like before the student heads over, there's a mandatory orientation they have to take. And then it's also answering parents' questions and things like that. So that's pretty much, yes.
So first I want to say with complete sincerity, that was very interesting, truly. And I think you guys hit the nail on the head with that, right? So I started by saying that all of us work with international students, and so all of us need to know something about working with international students. But does that mean that we all need to know now how to issue an F1 visa and what exactly goes on an I-20? We don't. We don't need to because we have experts on campus who know that. We need to know if our students ask questions, we might want to have a general sense. Yeah, no, you're going to need to have a full course of study. And if they will have more specifics, you can send them to the international office, right? Because we have experts. Katsumi is our PDSO, our primary designated school official, right? And you can tell that because she knows what she's talking about. But Anna's also a designated school official, and she answers questions every day. So we want you to have a general sense of what those answers are. And in terms of knowing culture, do you have to know in every culture how close you can stand or what it is that people like to eat or what they might be feeling? No. We want you to be aware that that might be affecting people and to ask them questions. But in answer, Rose, and next time, Rose, we're giving you the mic also because your questions were really helpful. The whole point is to make sure we're getting to the things that people want and that we're answering those questions and figuring out how we can get into the classroom and discuss these things. But in terms of some of the things we do, I want to make sure I also introduce here in the international office, we have Heine Zhu, who is a cultural expert for our Wenzhou Kean students. She works for both Wenzhou and for Kean here in the USA, and so she answers a lot of questions and she addresses a lot of the cultural issues and supports the students in many ways. And so we do have that. We'd like to have the buddy program that they have at WKU. Something that we're trying out this year in housing is a pilot program, an international living learning community where the dorm rooms will be integrated so that students who come from abroad will be living with students who are here from USA, and that's a pilot program that we're trying. So one of the things we want to make sure is that, again, you're asking questions and you're thinking about these things, but you know that you have experts in different places on campus that can assist with all of this so that we don't all have to be specific experts. But with that said, do you have questions? Are there questions about either the regulations that we learned or about the cultural experience that we learned about? Do people have specific things that they want to ask? You can always reach out to us. One of the things also I want to mention, I do want to say, like Mei Ling said, see something, say something. We bring people from our office, not just the international office, but the career services office all the time down to the counseling center. People are not going to necessarily go if you say there's a counseling center over there. So we say, here, either I'll say, I'll walk you down. Blanca walks people down all the time. Or we'll call and say, I'm sending a student now. Can they come to see you right now? So it's not just a suggestion. Go ahead. Where's my So we, sure. We're going to give you some specifics, but we are working to, we're working in a couple of ways. So we're working to change some things about the way we do registration. So this semester is hopefully a lot easier. Even small things, this is sort of cultural. When we say our registration opens at 12 o'clock on June 16th, and in Wenjo, for example, that's not 12 p.m., that's 12 a.m., and it's on a different day, and those students don't know they can go ahead and register. So we're being very careful to give the exact same instructions so that they get to register on the same day. But we're also doing some things so that we can fast track some overload permission or create new course sections. So we've been working closely with the provost's office to make sure that those students don't miss out. And if it's one or two, it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And meteorology is the most popular class that WKU students want to take because it is not offered at WKU, and they have good, like they get good feedback. Oh, you go on KUSA, take the meteorology class. So yes, and I've been made aware of that situation for some time now. So what we're doing in our office is to work with the registrar's office and also with our WKU counterpart to say, hey, we know that this class is going to be really popular, right? So we need to open up more sections, and having that conversation with our BPA's office to say, hey, and then our counterpart at WKU will say, there's so many more students that want to take meteorology, right? And obviously we don't want to overload, right? Absolutely, absolutely. So, absolutely, yep. Yep, absolutely. And the thing that's right, absolutely. And the great news is all of our WKU students that are coming next semester, drum roll, we have 177 new WKU students coming for the fall, including our extension students. It's going to be about 190, so it's going to be a big group. But they're all registered already. So you're good, right? Because we've been working with the registrar's office to be like, oh my God, close to 200 students. What classes are they going to take? So they actually registered at the same time our KUSA students registered, and we made that happen with the help of OCIS and our registrar's office, so that you're not getting something last minute to say, hey, we're going to have more sections. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. We can work with you on that for sure. Yes. Great.
Just on that, I think I want to say that that's been the approach now that we've been trying to take over in international studies, is just to find out everything that we can in advance and then bring a team together so that we're working on it across the campus. So when Katsumi says, first I'd like to say that that's this semester more than double the number of WKU students that we've ever had in a semester before. So that's it's because every department came together to make that happen. That's huge, but that also means we're going to have double the international students on campus that we've ever had. But when she says that not only is everyone registered, and it's been worked out, like the overloads and everything, it's done in advance so that we don't have to go person by person. But for example, in May, when we got all the students and we knew about them, she already scheduled their bus pickups. Because I can't tell you how many times last minute it's the bus pickups that get it. But if you can anticipate those problems in advance and get them scheduled, it does make the whole process smoother for everybody. Is there anything else? So, with that said, thank you guys for spending your morning with us, and class dismissed. We appreciate it. Thank you.